America leads the world in 4G mobile, and it is about to get even better. 5G. Faster speeds. Connecting everything. In real time. America's wireless industry continues to innovate to support your mobile-first life.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for making it out on a rainy/snowy day. We're thrilled you're here, and I think you will be too. We've got a great day lined up. And today we're here to talk about the future. We're here to talk about the future of the wireless networks, the next generation called 5G. It is, I truly feel we are at a place of a once-in-a-generation chance to make a difference for our homes, our cities, and our society. It's not just a phone. We're going to be connecting everything. And, you know, I've been around mobile for almost 20 years now, and I have never been more excited. And I got to say, when I think about it, it's really three things that are making me just really overwhelmed by what we're about to do here. The first is our 4G foundation. Over the last 5 years, we've spent $100 billion building out this amazing LTE network, and it covers the United States, 98% of the population. And it is fast enough to give you abilities to do almost whatever you want to do, wherever you want to do it. The speeds and the performance are amazing. And when you add that to the Internet of Things, which is coming, right now we think of it as Fitbit and 3G connected cars, but tomorrow it's going to be everything. And the next 5 years are all going to be about 5G and IoT. And we're just at the beginning. I think the illustrative point for me was when I was at CES, and instead of saying the coolest thing here is a 4G television, it was a chip that's the size of a watch, and it has the power of a computer, and it's going to tell you where you are and where you're going. It's really incredible, and we're going to put it in everything. And last is really the reason we're here, which is 5G. So we are about to invest billions of dollars in 5G. And 5G is 10 times faster, it's 5 times more responsive, and there are going to be more than 100 times devices than we have right now. So my favorite example in trying to make this concrete for you guys is a connected car in 4G will stop in 4.5 feet. A connected car in 5G will stop in 1 inch. So it's amazing what is about to come. The opportunities are just incredible. So today is important. We're bringing together policymakers with industry leaders that are making this happen. It's time for DC to engage right now because other nations in the world are. Japan, Korea, the European Union. We need to really take a look at this and make sure that we know what policies we need to have in place to make sure we are at the forefront of 5G. Our focus here today is on the consumer. How are the consumers going to benefit, and what does that mean for public policy? So speaking of public policy, it is my pleasure this morning to introduce Chairman John Thune. When we started planning this event, I said, we have to get Chairman Thune. We have to get Chairman Thune here. And the reason why is not just because he's so fantastic, but I think that our ability to deliver 5G is very much in the Senator's hands. The Chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee is a tireless public servant and a believer in the power of mobile innovation to really change lives, not only in South Dakota, but all across America. And he understands that spectrum is the fuel for our mobile lives and our global competitiveness. He is personally spearheading efforts to provide additional spectrum for 5G, unlock high-band spectrum, as well as improve and simplify the ability of operators to invest billions in infrastructure across the country. So it is a distinct honor and a real privilege for all of us to have Chairman John Thune here today.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Washington, for those of you who aren't from Washington, or as some people like to refer to it, Disneyland East. Anybody here from New Hampshire? Good. Well, I suppose everybody had to stay up there and vote today, but I got a feeling there are a few people who'd like to get out of New Hampshire and escape the craziness that's going on up there. Well, I appreciate very much the invitation to be with you today. Thank you, Meredith. Thanks to CTIA for the great work that they do advocating on behalf of the wireless world. And I always appreciate the invitation to come anywhere. You know, they always talk about members of Congress, and most of our presidential candidates are running against Congress in Washington, D.C. And so, you know, when your approval rating is in the single digits, getting invited anywhere is a good thing. But John McCain always says that when you get down into the single digits in terms of your approval rating, you're pretty much down to paid staff and blood relatives. And we may be down to paid staff. But anyway, I appreciate very much the chance to be with you and to talk about a subject which is critically important to the future of our country and to the future of our world. I think most of you are anxious to hear today, and you are going to hear from experts in the field, people who are actually out there making a difference. But I wanted to join you to share just some of my views as a policymaker who believes that wireless technology is just beginning to scratch the surface of its potential. Everyone here knows that 5G is the next hot thing in wireless, except nobody is quite sure exactly what that is. But there are thousands of people that are working around the world to develop cutting-edge systems and technologies that someday might officially be considered 5G. Terms like beamforming, MIMO, millimeter wave, small cells, and others will likely become part of the official lexicon the wireless industry uses to describe the next generation standard. But to me, 5G does not mean some yet-to-be-written technical specification. Instead, 5G represents the not-too-distant future where unbridled connectivity meets nearly unbounded capacity, unlocking limitless possibilities. That's what we're talking about. 5G isn't just the next incremental step in mobile speeds. It will be a revolutionary leap forward in wireless capability that will reshape the world around us and fundamentally change how we interact with that world. High capacity, low latency, high reliability, and low energy 5G technology means nearly anything can and will become a wireless device. Light bulbs, wheelchairs, socks, even the bricks in our walls will potentially become internet connected. But evaluating the possible impact of 5G by simply adding up the number of newly connected devices is missing the forest for the trees. Instead, we should think about what happens when the internet isn't just on people's phones or sitting at their desks, but instead is everywhere around them, flowing through dozens of objects. Imagine a wireless world where, thanks to multi-gigabit connections, download speed is no longer a relevant consideration for people, and any content or service is instantly available wherever and whenever someone wants. 5G has the potential to make online connectivity as ever-present and visible in our daily lives as the very air that we breathe. Once the internet recedes from our attention and simply becomes part of the fabric of our surroundings, the resulting innovations will make the wonders of the smartphone pale in comparison. Just as 25 years ago, it was hard to know how much the internet would change the way that Americans work, play, communicate, and travel. It's hard to imagine all the ways that 5G will reshape our lives over the next decade. There are some concrete benefits, however, that we know we'll see, particularly the rise of machine-to-machine communications. For example, 5G will enable computers and experts to monitor the health of our nation's infrastructure far more accurately and in more detail than can be done effectively today. 5G systems will enable the collection, the integration, and analysis of information that will be discreetly and constantly communicated by vast networks of sensors, automated systems, and other devices. Bridges and pipelines, for example, can be repaired before something breaks. This will save time, money, and lives. And we'll likely see similar benefits when it comes to managing traffic congestion or operating mass transit systems, because transportation managers will have far more ability to react to conditions in real time and to quickly, and maybe even automatically, resolve emergency situations. New smart cities technology, powered by next-generation wireless networks, could help governments better understand and address real problems that bureaucrats have struggled for years to solve. 5G will also have a profound impact upon communications public policy, particularly in the areas of universal service and competition. While 5G cannot eliminate the difficult economic realities of serving rural communities, it may help bridge the digital divide. Today, AT&T is working to deploy fixed wireless local loop service that could bring broadband to over 1 million rural households. A recently announced startup called Starry is promising to bring gigabit broadband to American homes this year using millimeter wave spectrum. Both of these efforts are still unproven works in progress, but these are projects being tested and deployed right now using current generation technology. Wireless deployments using next generation technologies could help bring new broadband services and new competitive choices to millions of American households and businesses, particularly those that remain offline today. 5G will bring faster speeds, more deployment options, and increased capabilities. As you work to develop 5G, I challenge all of you in the industry to think of how these improvements can help serve rural America, including the oftentimes forgotten parts of Indian country. I know that rural markets are not nearly as lucrative as urban ones, but this new technology should make it easier for broadband services in rural areas to be reasonably comparable to those found in urban areas. I hope this will be something that you will all focus on. We know that companies and consumers alike will benefit tremendously from connecting all Americans, not just most of them. 5G's impact on the telecom industry could also be profound. It's quite likely that the first time many Americans subscribe to a big gigabit broadband connection will be with a 5G-based wireless service, not with a fiber or cable-based offering. University of Nebraska professor Gus Hurwitz testified before the Senate Commerce Committee that within the next 1 to 8 years, MIMO and millimeter wave technologies could offer 10 times the capacity that coaxial cable can. According to the professor, and I quote, "Cable should be scared to death because this technology will revolutionize telecommunications." And we're not just talking about bringing faster speeds to people's smartphones. Professor Hurwitz suggests this technology could potentially allow for the entry of several new broadband competitors into every market in the United States, offering service at speeds comparable to or even exceeding that of cable. If his vision of the future comes to pass, all of our assumptions about market structure and competition in the broadband sector could be completely upended. And Starry may well be the first piece of evidence that the future is now. Some people today, many of them at the FCC, have spent a lot of time trying to convince us there is a broadband monopoly and that only government intervention can protect consumers, drive innovation, and create competition. People tell us that if you don't have a fiber optic wire going into your house or maybe a coaxial cable at worst, then there's no way that you can have a real broadband experience. These same people tell us wireless does not and never will compete with a monopoly of wires. But tell that to the dozens of wireless companies and foreign governments around the world racing to bring ultra-high-speed gigabit wireless internet services to market within the next 4 or 5 years. Tell that to the cable companies who realize that they are already in a competitive cage match with wireless providers. Now, I don't want to be too Pollyannish about how much next-gen wireless technology could change the American telecom industry. But if policymakers want to ensure Americans have more gigabit broadband choices than just a single wired offering, I think we should focus on our efforts on accelerating 5G development instead of worrying about micromanaging cable companies or messing around with government-owned broadband providers. That's exactly what people in Asia and Europe are doing right now. The rest of the world knows they can't catch up to us in 4G, so they're working hard to leapfrog the United States and instead take the lead in 5G. But as today's event makes clear, America's wireless industry is not going to cede our crown without a fight. But you can't do it alone. Policymakers like me and my colleagues here in the Congress cannot be complacent and think that yesterday's laws are a perfect fit for the future because the last 2 decades of wireless policy have been so successful. We too need to evolve and to do our work to bring about the next generation of wireless policy. And as many of you know, that's exactly what I've been trying to do over the last several months as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. My committee has held hearings and met with stakeholders to look at what policies may be necessary to help keep the United States at the forefront of wireless innovation. As I see it, there are 3 areas where Congress should focus its legislative attention. First, we need to improve how the federal government, which is the single largest spectrum holder in the country, manages and utilizes its own airwaves. Federal agencies already share some of their spectrum with the private sector, but more needs to be done to encourage them to relinquish or share additional bands. And while this is a complex challenge, it does not need to be an antagonistic effort. Like the private sector, federal agencies' wireless needs grow each year, but by aligning incentives and utilizing newer technologies, we may be able to find win-win solutions that benefit everyone. The second area we need to focus on is identifying specific bands that can be opened up for private use, both licensed and unlicensed. While creating the right spectrum management incentives for the federal government will help, history shows that Congress is often the most effective facilitator in bringing more wireless bands to the marketplace. Lastly, we need to examine ways to reduce the cost of deploying wireless services. Freeing up more spectrum is one way to do that, but there are other legal and regulatory barriers that make it more expensive to bring new services to the public. Helping to get government at every level out of the way of wireless deployment will only accelerate how soon Americans will benefit from 5G. I've been working to address all three of these areas in a draft bill called the Mobile Now Act. This legislation will ensure hundreds of megahertz of spectrum are made available for commercial use by the year 2020, which interestingly enough is the same year that many people expect to see the 5G standard formally adopted. The bill would cut through much of the bureaucratic red tape that makes it difficult to build wireless facilities on federal property, and it will direct the FCC to take action on streamlining regulations affecting small cell networks. Perhaps most importantly, Mobile Now would push the government to seriously examine millimeter wave frequencies to determine which are most suitable for 5G purposes. These high-frequency bands will be critical in securing the bandwidth needed to fuel multi-gigabit internet speeds. As a side note, one of the things I've learned over the last few years working on wireless issues is that the days of easy spectrum are over. In the past, whenever Congress needed a little more money or wanted to turbo boost wireless innovation, we could pick a band from various underutilized swaths of spectrum and then auction it for tens of billions of dollars. Of course, it's never been quite that easy. But I can't exaggerate how much more difficult it is today to find spectrum that can be easily repurposed for broadband. Spectrum demands for broadband and other wireless services have significantly increased over the last 20 years. As a result, the bands between 600 megahertz and 6 gigahertz have gotten extremely crowded. The Congressional Budget Office's scoring process also makes it more difficult, much more difficult today, to build up the same budgetary momentum that wireless bills enjoyed in the past. This doesn't mean that Congress should give up on writing or passing wireless legislation. It just means that we all have to reset our expectations a little bit and work even harder to do what must be done. The Mobile Now Act will build on the work Congress did in last year's Spectrum Pipeline Act. And while 5G may still be years away from reality, these are the kinds of incremental steps forward that we need to bring the future closer to us today. Ranking Member Bill Nelson and I are close to finalizing the details of the Mobile Now Act, and we hope to be able to introduce the bipartisan bill this week. Our colleagues in the House are also working on their own wireless legislation, and I'm confident we should be able to marry up our efforts and enact a good, bipartisan, pro-growth bill. At the end of the day, however, it will be the engineers and the entrepreneurs and the innovators who will determine what the wireless future holds. The best that government can do is to try and facilitate your success while making sure we are not accidentally standing in your way. I'm excited to watch how 5G will develop over the coming years, and I am eager to do my small part in helping to make it a reality. Thank you for the invitation to be with you today. Have a great meeting. Thank you. Thanks, Mary.
Comments. We appreciate you taking the time this morning, and we thank you for your leadership in the Senate and for all things wireless. Good morning. I'm Tom Sawanabori. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for CTIA. And of course, we're here to talk about 5G this morning. Specifically, we're going to talk about the key consumer benefits of 5G, what we're going to see with the next generation of wireless. But before we do that, let's be clear. 4G LTE is a great platform. It's been deployed very broadly, and there's a lot of gas left in the tank with 4G. The wireless industry continues to innovate with 4G, with capacity, performance, new features, new capabilities, many technical things that will enable things for customers and consumers to have better and better service. At the same time, we're working to make 5G a reality. It takes time, it takes spectrum, it takes innovation, it takes R&D. But 5G will be the next wireless frontier. So it will complement 4G technology, but provide important new benefits that we'll talk about in connecting our future. So what are some of the key consumer benefits of 5G? I'll focus on three main attributes. One, 5G will be very fast, even in dense areas. Number two, 5G will connect everything, supporting the Internet of Things. And lastly, 5G will be real-time, minimizing delays and latency and enabling new services and capabilities. In the white paper that you have on your chairs and it's been published by CTIA, we go into some detail to give examples of what's going on with the industry, how 5G will benefit consumers, and I want to thank my colleagues, especially Kevin Ryan, who helped me author this, and Bob Roche, who helped do some research on the 5G paper. So I hope you'll find that interesting and exciting and help you give you some examples of what 5G can do for us. So I want to give you a very quick example of each one of those attributes that I talked about. First of all, 5G being very fast. Think about Ultra HD, which is just starting to make an impact now and will be more and more prevalent in the future. Think about grabbing an Ultra HD movie before you grab a train ride or a plane ride and being able to enjoy that. Connecting everything. Thinking about, with 4G setting the stage for the Internet of Things, thinking about all things being connected wirelessly with higher density, much higher, massive density of devices. Wearables, things that consumers using, connected cars, sensors on all of our infrastructure, all of these things, enabling things so we can have automated traffic flow, parking and so forth to help our lives, especially in the health area. Monitors and sensors to help us manage our lives, be able to live longer and more fruitful lives. And then think about real time, reducing that latency and lag time that people perceive with wireless and also with some of their experiences. So virtual reality, which is just becoming mainstream. There's so many different devices coming out. You can actually, on the break, you'll be able to see some of the Samsung demonstrations of this. Thinking about grabbing a VR movie wirelessly and being able to enjoy that in the pleasure of your own home or some other venue. Thinking about education, thinking about being able to take students on a trip to Europe, to Rome, to the Colosseum, to be able to see things that they've never been able to see in full virtual reality. Think about medicine and being able to help doctors and scientists be able to do research and be able to do surgery with computer-aided devices. So these things will help in terms of being able to help virtual reality and augmented reality become more and more real time. So I want to dive into these a little bit more with our esteemed panel, and we're fortunate to have a number of key leaders from the industry. So let me invite our panelists up, Mr. Sanjeev Athalye from Qualcomm, Mr. Brian Daly from AT&T, John Godfrey from Samsung, Chris O'Connor from IBM, and Howard Wright from Intel. Would you please join me up here?
Put your one over.
So I was wondering if John was going to be on this side.
Sanjeev, yes. Well, good morning. We've got a great panel up here this morning, and I'm excited to have everybody. Each one of these individuals represents different expertise and experience in the industry, so we hope to bring that out. And I'm going to start a series of panel questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience for a few questions as well. So be thinking about things you might like to ask these experts. And you have their biographies in your bulletin, so in your program bulletin. So let's start off with the questions. Let's dive right into it. Now that I've pontificated on what 5G is, and you've heard some of the comments from Senator Thune and Meredith, maybe John from Samsung, what do you think about this 5G? Samsung's been doing a tremendous amount of research and R&D on 5G. You're into some of the consumer devices, both with virtual reality and smartphones and displays. What are you thinking of? What are the primary benefits of 5G?
Well, Tom, I think you covered really well the three things that define 5G: very fast, everywhere, and low latency. Of those, I'm probably most excited about the very fast. Samsung's developed millimeter wave technology that we are trialing now in the United States and doing a lot of experimentation with. We'll be using it in South Korea as well around the upcoming Winter Olympics. At those very, very high frequencies, like 28 gigahertz, 37 to 40 that the FCC is considering and higher, those very high frequencies, you can get a massive amount of data through, really huge leaps beyond what's capable today. And so just as in the move from 3G to 4G, people weren't quite sure what they were going to use all of that data for, but consumers found a way. They found something to do with it, and innovative companies in the United States built on that network and found a way to use the data. That's going to happen with 5G too. So we can predict things. You referred to Ultra HD and virtual reality. I might add augmented reality as well, where maybe you're walking around in the real world, but information about what you're seeing and where you are is overlaid on top of your view of the real world with glasses or an earbud or maybe a translucent screen that you hold up. Can really reconnect people with the real world. And I think the massive amounts of data that 5G will enable will drive those kinds of breakthroughs.
Oh, thank you, John. That's very exciting. Howard, how about yourself? From Intel's perspective, what do you think about the benefits of 5G? What could it offer?
We think at Intel, think about 5G as the network of all networks. So it's a culmination of all these fabrics of these technologies, both unlicensed and licensed, both centimeter wave and millimeter wave, all coming together to make our lives better. If you can imagine, even in this room, everything that draws current will be connected to the internet, either at a proximal, macro area, and it will allow me as the individual, as well as the service providers, to offer new use cases that have not even been dreamed up yet. And that's the most exciting part. That Autobahn that we're creating is going to enable things that have yet to be dreamt up.
Great, thank you. So we think about deployment of 5G, and we've talked about briefly 4G being the main underlying foundational platform. So maybe Sanjeev, what do you think about what are the deployment scenarios? Where do you think 5G might be deployed first? And do you see it deployed mostly in dense urban cities, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as we've seen with 4G and previous technologies, typically a new generational technology starts off where the demand is most. And so we think it'll start off in dense urban areas or urban areas where the demand lives. And that's for two reasons. One is the demand lives there. And the second reason is mobile operators only have a certain amount of money they can spend every year. And so if they have to put that, apportion it in over a 3 or 5 year period, they're probably going to start off where the demand is. But over time, we see that 5G will then proliferate into suburbia, into rural areas, pretty much everywhere. And while that is happening, while 5G progresses geographically over time, what will be holding up data demand is 4G in its evolution, Wi-Fi, and other wireless technologies that we use today.
Brian, how about your perspective? You've got the operator's perspective and a lot of experience here from AT&T. What do you think about deployment scenarios for 5G?
Well, when we look at 5G, one of the things we're going to find is physics and economics are really going to be butting heads. As we move up into the upper bands, into millimeter wave, the physics is really going to take over on the deployment strategies for those frequency bands. At those high frequencies, due to the propagation characteristics, you're really focusing on a lot of the use cases for dense urban areas, for suburban areas, and perhaps dense rural areas. Certainly 5G offers opportunity for increasing the performance over LTE in the lower frequency bands, but once you get up into this higher spectrum, really physics and economics are really going to dictate on what can be done.
Can you say a little bit more about the physics? I think it was mentioned a little bit. We mentioned these terms, centimeter wave and millimeter wave. Can you explain to our group, like, what does that really mean and the implications of that?
Yeah, as you go up higher in frequency, really the propagation of the radio waves becomes more challenging. It becomes more point to point. It becomes very difficult to penetrate even glass or walls. So at millimeter wave, it really tailors itself to a lot of more fixed point-to-point type of services, more localized services than you would see in for example, large rural areas. Mm-hmm. And the lower bands are more conducive to those rural environments.
If I may add just quickly is, I think millimeter wave, the higher bands are extremely important because they have wider RF bandwidth, right, which leads to higher data rates and lower latencies. But one of the things we've been working on with 5G is to have the 5G design address all types of spectrum. So it could be spectrum below a gigahertz, or it could be spectrum up to 100 gigahertz. It could be licensed, unlicensed, or kind of shared licensed. And it could be TDD or FDD. So we're trying to make sure that 5G addresses all the spectrum opportunities out there, so we can get the high rates where millimeter wave is available and the physics permit, but also that we can go over wide areas just as 4G and 3G do using lower bands as well.
Okay,
Tom,
so you mentioned...
Tom, could I make a comment too?
Sure.
Okay, the panel's starting to get lively. I think 5G is not only, and millimeter wave is not only about fixed point-to-point, but also, for the first time, mobility, I think, is going to be possible in these frequency ranges. The key breakthrough is that with an antenna array, you can create a steerable beam and overcome some of the propagation loss of physics by concentrating the energy into a beam. And literally, the beam can follow the user as they move down the street. Now, it's going to be a new network architecture, but it is feasible. And the other kind of good news about the very high frequencies is that the base stations don't have to be big. They can be, as I heard Meredith put it recently, the size of a smoke detector. So they could be on the outside of a building, and you wouldn't even, you wouldn't need to get a tower permit to put up a brand new tower.
Interesting. So, we're going to have a spectrum and policy panel later, but you did mention that we're going to need low band and mid band spectrum for kind of that coverage and getting the broader area coverage. But that'll be interesting, and we'll come back to Chris in a few minutes to talk about Internet of Things, because I think ultimately it'll take some more of those bands as well as the high bands. So let's go into some of these aspects about very high speed. So, the 4G networks, the LTE networks are getting faster and faster with carrier aggregation and LTE advanced features. How much faster do we think they're really going to be? Does anybody, Brian, maybe you want to take a first shot at that?
Yeah, and again, as a colleague from Samsung just mentioned, as you go higher in frequencies and have broader bandwidths, you can get very high data rates in when you have larger bandwidths. So we're talking, potentially 10 times to 100 times increase in data rates over some of the earlier technologies. For example, we can get peak data rates in LTE at about 1 gigabit per second. In 5G, the goals are looking at 20 gigabit per second.
Wow, that's really fast. Up to 20 gigabits. I guess it's going to depend on where you are. And
where
what kind of device
those are peak data rates. A lot of dependencies on that, but certainly those are goals.
And do you see these? Do the panelists? Do you see these things being needed primarily for capacity? Do you see things? Maybe someone wants to comment about ultra high def and whether that's something that's really coming. I don't know.
So there's a lot of use cases you can imagine for that much speed. At IBM, we're not going to make the chips or necessarily get into some of the deeper technology discussions, but we're on the back end side of that. Right now, if you go and build a commercial aircraft today, it's 6 million parts from 3,000 suppliers. So next time you're in a plane, just think about that. That's how they put a plane together. Right, and each one of those parts is instrumented. Right, and each one of those parts then has a data capacity that's associated with it. And it's no longer an electrical wire that goes to a light on the cockpit that something happens, right? It all goes to a computer panel. And then they decide how much of that information stays in the plane and how much of it goes down to the ground. And if you think about that, you think about the next generation sports car. It's going to have 7 SIM chips in the back of it. And those chips are going to be doing everything from your entertainment. They're going to be streaming video into your kid's car seat on the back of the seat. Not going to have to plug a DVD in anymore. To actual real-time warranty repair. They're going to call you up and they're going to talk to you about extending your warranty based on your driving habits. Right? All that's going to happen by the amount of information that they can actually consume, how they get that information off, the speed and the reliability of that connection. And that's going to drive the need for 5G. It's going to drive the need for both the data rate as well as it's going to drive the need for consumption beyond where we see kind of the current 4G networks. Where we just announced a deal with Whirlpool, right? Every washing machine, dryer, refrigerator in your home is about to come with a connection. It's going to start with Wi-Fi, but they're going to want to enable that to the cheapest, best, easiest frequency technology to be able to get the information to them and why your washing machine stopped working or why your dishwasher doesn't work. And for them, it's a business equation, right? If they can not roll a truck and tell you how to fix your machine, it's a tremendous cost savings for them. And if you think about 32 million Whirlpool machines deployed in the United States from a consumer point of view, every buck they save by not rolling a truck turns into real dollars. So technologies like 5G, the ability to reach into that home, be able to get that information out, and be able to help you with all these different scenarios is going to help drive a massive influx around the Internet of Things. And we see this taking place. Every industry that we see is dropping sensors onto devices and then figuring out what to do with the data.
That's fascinating. We're seeing 4G LTE going into this year's model year cars already, and we're talking about 5G and doing even higher rate streaming in the future. And then, as Chris said, the Internet of Things getting into the home, they are automating things like and putting machine-to-machine chips in washing machines. So, what about some of these things? Maybe John or Howard, this Ultra HD technology, is it really taking off? Is it here, or is it just a fad?
Yeah, it's here. Ultra HD is the successor to HD, and it's not only higher resolution, although that's part of it. It's 4 times the resolution of HD, but it's also a more lifelike picture. High dynamic range means the bright spots are really, really bright, while the dim areas are still very subtle and shadowy. And the color gamut is a lot broader too, and so it's in all the high-end TVs. The price is dropping very rapidly, but I think that what will drive 5G demand is not only that, but I think also more display screens out in the world that are being fed content. So I really do think there will be more use of kiosks in public places, retail, bus stops, capital bike share, rental stations, more use of telepresence. Those are high quality video demand drivers that will also increase the number of points for distribution.
It'll be personalized too. You'll walk into a store, and because your watch or your phone tells it who your favorite sports team is, that screen will start playing a scene from your last sports team. This is it might sound like science fiction, but we're actually working with retailers on this today. Yeah. They want to be able to walk in, pick up who you are, if you choose to advertise yourself, and right away, a favorite game that might be iconic in your own genre will start to play, and it'll attract your attention, it'll keep you at that display stand, and then they'll try to sell you stuff along the way.
That'd be
and
really
then
cool.
you think about all the personalization per display that goes along with that. We're working with an elevator manufacturer that when you get in the elevator, if you're in it alone, it'll change to your favorite colors, right? Or it'll play something relevant to you on the screen. No longer will it be the little screen up there that we all stare at so we don't look at each other, right? It'll be literally the walls will be liquid or liquid display, and the walls themselves will start to put something in that's your own persona. And all of that is information that won't be stored on a disk in the elevator. It'll come down dynamically.
And actually,
not only will I get my own elevator music, I will get my own elevator video.
There you go.
Right?
Exactly.
What's interesting is you talk about Ultra HD. For the past actually couple of years, for example, our chipsets have enabled Ultra HD capture on mobile phones. So there are mobile phones on the market today that can capture 4K video. So if you look at the Super Bowl as an example, typically we're used to speeds coming on the downlink, from the towers to us, and us consuming data. But if you look at events like the Super Bowl, a lot of it is people capturing kickoff or the third quarter start. An operator said that they did about 7 terabytes of data in the Super Bowl just during the game. And you can imagine that instead of capturing HD video, now people are capturing 4K video, and the amount of data that generates and data rates that are needed.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, because it's like, where is all this Ultra HD content going to come from? And now you're talking about user-generated content, which is more important, I think. And even though you may not see Ultra HD on a smartphone that easily, I think, to your point, there's many more types of tablets, beyond tablets, consumer devices, things, kiosks and so forth. We'll be able to see this kind of.
Yeah, with all the screens that John talked about, you can just throw your content up onto a screen and see it in 4K.
Howard's chomping at the bit.
That's what we're talking about. Most of the companies up here on the panel here are working on 4K, 8K, 12K technologies for the Olympics that are coming. And you're going to see folks walk around with a handheld device that can capture not only when you're in one event watching ice skating or hockey, but you can also in real time see 4 different screens at 4K or 8K. That's what we're going to do with all that 20 gigabits per second. So that's kind of the predictive analytics of this Minority Report world that we will live in. But more fundamentally, if these nodes, these smart pieces of sensors and technologies are all around the network, could that help us prevent a Flint, Michigan? Could that help us prevent some of the methane gas leak out in California? Those are the benefits that we have to make sure that all of this fabric is spread across the entire U.S. so that we can figure out how to help not only ourselves as for-profit companies, but also the greater good.
Yeah, we think 70% of the sensors that are going to get hooked up in the world are going to be B2B, business-to-business oriented. So while 30% of them will be things you see, 70% of them are going to be working in the background around either manufacturing or supporting your infrastructure, and tremendous amount of instrumentation that's going to go along with that.
So let's stay with that theme of kind of the M2M and the Internet of Things, which is the latest thing that we call it. And this has already been happening for a number of years. We have work going on in connected cars. We have M2M devices. We've got metering going on. Smart city applications are starting to take off. But maybe, Chris, since you're focused at IBM on, you're the general manager for Watson IoT, and I just think of that as he's the guru of IBM for IoT. What are the key attributes of some of these wide area networks that I think are going to help with licensed spectrum enable the Internet of Things?
So a lot of the qualities have already been mentioned, right? The ability to have the spectrum and the ability to reach into different types of buildings, arenas, and environments is going to be key. The ability to have it be reliably provided is going to be key. Because the scenarios that we're constructing these days are not just around a single device getting a video feed or providing a video feed. It's about being able to combine multiple streams of information together and then learn what to do out of that habit. The reason we bought the weather company, people look at IBM and say, why would IBM go buy the weather company? We bought the weather company for the Internet of Things. Right? And the reason my group bought the weather company is because we see weather and the Internet of Things as synonymous attributes that need to be combined. Most of the Internet of Things is outside. Most of the weather takes place all the time, all around us, right? And so if you think about operating a fleet of vehicles, a fleet of airplanes, a fleet of cars, getting ready to personally go out on the road, you want to understand how do things operate at 20 degrees versus 70 degrees versus 100 degrees. And everything performs different. And if you can bring that information in by the millions, not just by the 5s and the 10s and the individuals, but you can bring that information in by the millions of different devices, you can distort the patterns. You can learn the patterns of how a fleet of cars or how a fleet of airplanes or how a fleet of capabilities work at one set of variables, 20 degrees outside and snowy, versus 100 degrees outside. And you can actually tell people warnings. You can give manufacturers different warranties. You can put different amounts of capabilities in there. So we see the combination of Watson, which is this clever brand name we use to go win Jeopardy, but actually the machine learning aspect of that, to combine these different streams of data together, your machine data coming together with your weather data, coming together with your video feed, that could be your 4K or something else, as an opportunity to provide a learning event for businesses and people around the world around not only what their individual device does, but if you make them by the millions, to be able to see exactly how your millions of things you make are performing in all these different environments, and have it be a learning environment where you actually can be able to improve both the experience as well as the ability for the thing to perform. So we think there's safety and health as well as satisfaction that goes along in this massive instrumentation, and then you combine all the information together. You think about 5G, it gives you the opportunity to bring all that information together. So we think of it as more data in to be processed versus elimination of data or removal of data, which has been kind of classically what we've talked about.
So a lot of B2B enablement, but then a lot of consumer benefits coming from those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would add power consumption to that. I mean, all of that has to be done at low power consumption. If you think it's bad enough that you have to take your phone and charge it, once or twice or 5 times a day, all those sensors that are going to be embedded, in millions of places, have to sit there for maybe 10 years, in 2 AA cells, and operate and do everything that I just mentioned.
So maybe talk about some of these there are some other technologies. Sometimes when people think about Internet of Things, they're thinking, well, I already have my device connected through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and there's this newer technology called Zigbee, which is doing some home energy devices. Maybe can somebody clarify for me what's the difference, and why do we need some of those, and how do they complement these wide area network technologies like 4G and 5G?
The way we look at Internet of Things is, we think of it as Internet of everything, and as we aspire to have kind of one technology able to cover this entire gamut of applications, the unfortunate thing is that it can't. And so we see a complementary set of different technologies enabling these different use cases. So you think about body area networks. It could be a smart shirt, or it could be a pacemaker inside your body. You need a body area network for that. Or you can think of a local area network, and you go into a wider area network. So we think with the current set of technologies, it's cellular with 4G LTE, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and to some extent Zigbee as well, are the suite of technologies in the wireless space that are going to fill this. And then 5G will cover a large number of these use cases with one technology solution. But still, I don't think 5G will necessarily address all the use cases.
Tom, I would add some of the distinction is in the economics. For a consumer building their home wireless network with Zigbee and Wi-Fi, they're making the investment in the wireless network for their home, where they will be the person who benefits from it. But they're not going to make the investment in putting wireless infrastructure down the roads and in the parks and throughout the outside world. That's where you need a carrier to step in and really build the investment in a reliable network that covers everywhere. So the two worlds work together.
Right. Brian, how do you see, at AT&T you use things like Wi-Fi and you use licensed networks primarily, so how do you see, what's the role of licensed networks versus the unlicensed space from your perspective, from an operator's perspective?
Yeah, well, I think as we get to 5G, I think all types of spectrum, licensed, unlicensed, shared spectrum, they're all going to come into play, and they're all going to be very important. We look at 5G as really a network of networks. I think that was the term that was already used, where it's going to be access agnostic. The core network is going to be able to interface to different radio access types. And it's going to be independent on whether it's a licensed radio access type, an unlicensed radio, or shared with some incumbents on a convention basis. And each of these will have its own deployment use cases depending upon what type of services are going to be supported by the different access technologies. And I think it's a little bit early to say which ones are going to be players in there, because that's still being worked out. But certainly they're all going to play a major role.
So we're looking ahead to 5G, but 4G is starting to enable more and more IoT things, and there's more capabilities that we're actually going with lower power and lower cost chipsets to enable things in 4G. So we got a good runway, a good path to get there. But maybe on the consumer side, John, talk to us a little bit about some of the consumer devices that are coming out with, in kind of the IoT area, or whatever devices that you see both at Samsung and in the industry.
Sure. Well, IoT is finding its way into everything Samsung makes, and we make a lot of things. So there's already IoT capabilities being built into home appliances, televisions, home automation. We have a company we acquired that actually started here in Washington, D.C. called Smart Things, which has built the largest open interoperable ecosystem of IoT devices. So consumers will be able to buy these kinds of connected things and customize their environment. But I also want to emphasize that everybody in this room is already part of the Internet of Things right now, because you all have a smartphone in your pocket. And that is an IoT device. It's got a GPS sensor. It's got an accelerometer so it can detect motion. It's got a camera and a microphone. Many of them can, like Samsung ones, can detect your heart rate, your blood oxygen saturation. There are environmental sensors being built into these smartphones. And I use mine every day when I commute to work. Does anybody here use Waze? It's a fantastic application of the IoT, because instead of someone having to go out and very expensively put sensors on every road in Washington, D.C., it just relies on the sensors that the users carry around with them. And it's made it possible for that to become a real-time traffic data network with very little investment.
Anyone else want to comment on consumer? Any additional things that you see in consumer? I mean, there's a lot of things going on. We talk about some of them in the paper with a lot of new virtual reality. I think everybody's launching either a new or a brand new virtual reality headset.
We see every industry on the planet right now in a race to figure out how to adopt the Internet of Things. So IBM tracks 18 different industries, from banking to industrial sector to health and retail and a whole set of things in between. In every industry, there are a set of companies that are racing to adopt the Internet of Things. And they're racing to figure out some difference in the way they can compete inside of that industry. And they're doing three things. They're trying to get efficiency. What I have, do I make it work better? They're coming up with different business models. I mean, literally one day you're going to get a call from an automobile manufacturer, and they're going to say, we noticed you take off from the line a little bit quick. And in fact, we noticed there's a lot of brake dust on your rims when you slow down. You know, if you were to change these habits, we'll give you 3 extra months of warranty. Right, so that day's coming. In fact, it's already here in some places around B2B scenarios. They call each other up and tell the other people in the business, here's how you use my equipment. It's coming to you at your home. And some of that will be fun, some of that will be, that's a little embarrassing, right? But you'll get the opportunity to decide, do I want more warranty or not? And these types of scenarios. And then the last thing is, it's enabling people that make things to talk to their clients. So let's go back to Whirlpool, 104-year-old company, tradition of bending metal and making plastic. That's what they do, right? That's what their machines are. For the first time, they're going to be able to talk directly to their consumers. They're not going to have Sears. They're not going to have a distributor. They're not going to have anything between them and their client. And that's going to be industry changing for them and also against their competition at the same time. So we see in terms of what's going on, this huge shift in all these industries racing to it. We're working with Under Armour, just announced a partnership with Under Armour. In the future, you're going to put on a shirt. The body heat is going to give you enough power to turn that on and activate it so that it can send more data about you of what it detects into your cell phone. And then that cell phone is going to give you the ability to participate with everybody on the planet that looks and is like you in terms of understanding your statistics versus those. Think about taking that back into a healthcare scenario, right? In terms of everybody maybe that has diabetes that's participating. And these are the scenarios we imagine and that we're preparing for in terms of how we see the consumer and the consumer data coming in and what the impact that's going to be.
Right, so the technology, the sensor is important, but then the data, from your perspective, the data is critically important to get to generate a benefit for the business and the consumer.
Our Watson healthcare solutions today ingest millions of records. So when a doctor goes to consult with it, it's no longer the product of his own experience and the last training that he had, but he's able now to see, literally we have 100 million records in the Watson healthcare solution in the United States. There's 300 million people in the United States. So they're able to see a demographic of what's going on with health against that population base.
And Tom, you mentioned VR, and I want to stress a consumer use case that specifically will use 5G and illustrates what some of the challenges for the 5G network are going to be, and that's virtual reality. I want to invite everyone to check out the demo over in the corner. That's Samsung's Gear VR. It's a headset that we developed with Oculus. It only costs $99. It's a very affordable price point for consumers, and you snap in a Samsung smartphone and you have VR. Where the content comes from is a camera that has pairs of HD cameras pointing in all directions, including up and down, and it captures a huge amount of data. And so then that generates this spherical experience that you'll try out if you try the demo. For that amount of data to be collected from out in the field, say you bring the camera to your kid's soccer game so the grandparents can be there and experience it, or the NFL suspends one of these cameras over the field during the Super Bowl, or the NBA has one up over the tip-off. And many other, I guess those aren't consumer use cases, but consumers can use a VR camera to enable other people to be at the place where the consumer is. But it's going to generate a lot of data. And unless you're hauling very long Ethernet cables around with you everywhere you go, you're going to want to connect it wirelessly. I think when the 5G network is in place, that will be a very viable use case for consumers.
That's exciting. That looks like a lot of fun. So Sanjeev, maybe how are we going to maintain security? Because you talked about connecting all these things to the networks and Internet of Things, and our networks have been pretty resilient and secure. But how do we make sure when we're connecting to all these other thousands and millions of devices that we maintain kind of that security and connection?
Yeah, security is actually a fairly big challenge. I cross my fingers. Fortunately, the cellular networks have been robust to security attacks, and they happen all the time. But I think where you're going with the question is, if you think about your wireless router at home, you buy it from a store, it has a default username and a password, and every hacker worth his or her salt knows what that is, and they can hack into your wireless router possibly and create havoc. And now if you think about billions of these small sensors and things connected to the internet, it opens up another frontier where hackers can come and do bad things. So the way that we've been approaching it from Qualcomm and others in the industry is at multiple levels. The first one is make sure down at the chip level, your compute and your memory is basically as hardened as possible, so you keep all your sensitive information in kind of a security enclave. The second thing to do is make your communication secure. So once you need to send that stuff over a wire on a circuit board or over the air, you have good security protocols to make sure that works. So that's been in place on cellular networks for a while on Wi-Fi as well. The third thing is then making sure that you have security at the place where the data is held. And we don't play in that space as much, but we've developed technologies that take a different approach to security. So traditionally, if you think about antivirus or anti-malware software, it relies upon signatures. It's a cat and mouse game. Right. So what happens is someone finds a vulnerability in the field, and they say, that has a particular signature, and you load it into the next antivirus software, patch your machine, and you're kind of good to go until the next one comes. What we've been working on is more of a cognitive or a machine learning basis for security, which is, why is your flashlight application accessing your contacts, right? And so it's a more heuristic approach to security, which says it learns the behavior down at the chip level even, and at the software level, and says, I look at these patterns and something's all right. And so I'm going to flag it and do something about it. And I think that's the model we can see finding its way into the Internet of Things beyond the mechanisms I talked about earlier, because we're talking about sensors and connected devices that could be tens of cents or sub-dollar kind of price points. You can't afford to have enough memory to have anti-malware software running on it. So definitely a challenge, but one that the industry is looking at, and I think consumers should not panic that the IoT is going to.
Great.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. You know, as we look at the number of connected devices getting into everything from shirts to toasters to you know, washing machines, certainly the security aspects are an important part of the design. And as we develop the standards for 5G, one of the concepts is security by design. Security can't be an afterthought as we develop the standards. It needs to be an integral part of developing those standards and take it seriously and understand the different use cases. And as you mentioned, there'll be multiple layers of security as well. You know, everything from the chip level up to the applications themselves, where, you know, some of the more medical type applications will need higher levels of security than perhaps some of the, you know, just basic sensor devices that are just, you know, giving bursts of data occasionally.
Great. That's important to make sure we enable this in a secure manner. So,
Tom, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is going to be refreshing their cybersecurity framework and adding IoT elements to that, and I'm sure CTIA and all of the companies here will be participating in that. I think that kind of a voluntary standards-based framework will really do a lot to help enhance security.
great. Let's shift gears into that real-time thing. We talked about it a little bit already, but we talked a little bit about virtual reality. What are other things that really need that low latency, that low delay or lag time? Howard, maybe
Yes.
can you comment?
Autonomous driving, as you see all the demos and hear about some of the trials that are going on around the world with these vehicles. The idea that those vehicles would be then tied to what we've experienced in 3G is just absolutely not a possibility. So the processing power that goes into a vehicle, and the sensors at around the vehicle, both internally and externally, that has to be at a latency that is, you know, less than milliseconds, so that the intelligence in the autonomous driver can adapt. Those things cannot be replicated on our live streets.
So I think Meredith talked about that. How quickly, you know, the technology. If the technology can reduce that latency, then we can start to apply the brakes much more quickly in
Correct.
a matter of inches instead of feet, right?
Right.
That sort of thing. Any other benefits we see of reducing the latency? I know, John, you've been working on that at Samsung on VR, but is there a place in VR that?
I'm really excited about augmented reality, and I think, you know, Google Glass was a starting point, and I think something like that is going to come back. I have sort of a vision as a parent of two teenagers who spend a lot of their lives looking down at their cell phone, you know, texting their friends. In the 5G world, we can all look up at the real world again, and maybe the texts will be distracting us a little bit in the corner of our field of vision. But on the other hand, with augmented reality, the internet will be able to tell you things about what it is you're looking at in the real world and help you reconnect with the real world. And I think that will be a powerful application, and I'm especially excited about applications to help people with disabilities to cope with the world around them, low vision or low hearing, as they move through the world with the IoT and the power of the 5G network. As long as the latency is low enough that there's not a lot of lag, it will help them navigate the world much more effectively and give them new independence.
That's great.
What's also interesting is there's an application for real time even in the IoT. So if you think about, you know, we're having a winter storm now, and somewhere in some forest a tree will fall and hit an electrical wire, and, you know, what we want to hope is that it doesn't take out the eastern grid, right? And so electrical systems require very low latency notifications because it is a grid, and if you have a disruption in one power line here, it may trip circuits, you know, in a kind of a snowball effect fashion. And so having a really low latency link that says, I've detected a failure, electrical plant B, you know, do something, is very important and could be an application for 5G ultra reliable communication.
That's a great use case, and I think one that can really help consumers
Right.
The whole latency thing will allow, we see, industries to consolidate expertise. So if you think about oil platforms, thousands of oil platforms in the world, you can't load scientific experts onto every one. Look in the Gulf, look what happened, right? But if you have the right latency and you have the right bandwidth, you can put your experts in one spot, and they can run all that stuff remotely. Aircraft manufacturers, right? Jet engine manufacturers, right? They're renting their engines. Most of us will fly in an airplane where the engine is rented to the owner of the plane, right? Today. And what are the aircraft, the jet engine manufacturers saying? They're saying, we know how to rent that engine to you as the owner of the plane and operate it better than you do as the aircraft owner. And if you think about latency and you think about bandwidth, right, and you think about the components in a jet airplane, not only can they run it, Pratt & Whitney can run their engines 16% better, so that's bottom line cost on fuel, but they can also run it more reliably if they can see all that information directly, and they have an operations center that they actually are enabled to do that out of. So consolidation of expertise with this bandwidth and the capabilities changes everybody that makes things into a service model versus a seller. And so you're going to see, for example, an airplane, which is 6 million parts, 3,000 suppliers, many of those will be rented components inside your airplane that will be serviced by somebody else versus the aircraft manufacturer now having to be the expert on that. And that will enable safety, it'll enable better cost, and a whole set of things that go along with it. We see that dynamic across all the industries that were just mentioned, as well as many more.
Great. We have a few more minutes. Let's take a couple of questions from the audience, if there are any. Sure.
Question on this, do you feel like privacy is going to disappear in the tech world?
You want to use the microphone?
Yeah, question like is,
That's disappeared or going to?
Well, it kind of disappears. Are you naive to believe that we'll have it in the future because you're a sensor for so many networks as you're out and about, and what's the thinking on privacy in addition to security?
Our belief at IBM is that the data is ultimately owned by the person that is driving the use case. And that is something we stand behind as a company, which is the data is not free. It's not for everybody to consume. It doesn't go to some cloud where everybody can magically see it or have at it. It belongs to, if you choose to wear the shirt that the hospital gives you, it's because you've opted into that patient care and you still have the same privacy concerns and the same regulations and the same things. It's just an enabler of technology. And in the business-to-business scenarios I've mentioned, it's because the two companies have contractually agreed that that's how the information will get saved. We see and we enable tremendous siloization of the information itself, and we think that's critical. There'll be country and law regulation, it's already out there today, as well as there'll be consumer demand and use case information that we think is going to necessitate keeping those piles of information separate from each other. And on the back end, you have to make sure that you've enabled for that. And then laws and regulations will help lay down the fabric, I think, for ensuring that's going to be there. It won't be perfect, but it will be about as perfect as we are today with the cell phones and the smartphones that we walk around with already.
Okay, let's another question here. Okay.
If we can rent engines for airplanes, what about just renting the car that's going to self-drive you around and just input your information, say, I want to go there, and it will take you and you're running it? Is that a possibility?
I think it's a huge possibility. If you look at the folks
you
that
just mentioned Uber's future plan.
If you look at the folks at Daimler, right, they've spun off a division called Car2Go. IBM worked with them to enable that technology. You can walk down the street, you can grab the car on your cell phone, swipe your card, pick it up. The only thing it doesn't do yet is drive you. But everything else is there, and in fact, if you're a customer of Daimler, it knows about your last driving. It even knows how well you drove that car. And what you did with it, and it even will sell you insurance in some countries based on that. So you think about your kids. All of us grew up, we have to have our own insurance. We have our own cars, right? You're moving to a world where if I've rented from you before, I don't need my own insurance because you'll sell me the policy based on how fast and how slow I drove that car the last time I owned it. And you'll opt in. And if you're a little heavy on the gas, you get a different rate than if you're a little lighter on the gas. And that's all here. And the only part that's not there is the self-driving aspect of it.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. What public safety applications do you see? Some were mentioned, but I'm thinking either from the consumer perspective or first responder agencies, fusion centers.
Well, one clearly would be in emergency response to someone who's had a car accident. The ambulance is on its way there, and the person's smart devices are already relaying health information to the ambulance. Maybe after the ambulance arrives, an expert doctor located remotely can begin to administer care through telepresence because they've got a very high quality video feed, and if the latency is low enough, maybe they can even operate on the person remotely. So those are some exciting applications,
Yeah,
but they require the new network.
Also see applications to help first responders themselves. For example, sensors on them so that you can detect if you're going into an environment that's dangerous to you more readily and relay that back to other first responders. Video cameras on first responders. So I think the opportunity is there for the public safety first responder as well as consumers. For example, later this week I'll be out in California talking with Cal OES about the potential for an early earthquake warning system, which requires very low latencies to get information to you if there's a pending earthquake. So there's many opportunities available public safety run.
Great. So there's lots to look forward to, and we're looking forward to hearing the other remarks from our other panelists and speakers. So I want to thank all of our esteemed panelists this morning for joining us and taking the time to come down and share with us their thoughts, their leadership, and their expertise. And let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break. Please feel free to get some coffee, get some breakfast. There's going to be some Samsung VR demonstrations up here in the upper right corner. If you haven't seen it, you got to check it out.